I'll say this throughout, you always think about the guest experience. I sell boats, but I think of each person, each captain, each family, each group of people that are going to go out as a guest, because we've designed this for them to enjoy the natural environment. When you're out in nature, we want to do that in the most seamless way possible. So that's why we started with energy.
Hey folks, I'm Conor Gaughan, and welcome to Consensus in Conversation, a podcast where we're talking with innovators, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders committed to building successful businesses that also help us build a better world. I want to start today talking about the power of 1%. No, not the 1%, just 1%. 1/100th. A seemingly very small amount. But percentages are funny things. They aren't numbers, they're proportions. 1% can be as tiny as a penny or as big as a planet. Just depends on what the total is. 1% of 1 billion is 10 million. But even when 1% is small, it can still make a big difference over time through the power of compounding. Because when you keep adding 1%, you're not just adding a constant amount, you're adding more and more every time as the original amount grows. There's a reason why a guy as smart as Albert Einstein called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. It can add up in incredible ways and surprisingly quickly. If you have $1 and you increase that dollar by 1% every day for a year, then at the start of the next year, you'll have $37.78. That's an increase of 3,678%. And this incredible power isn't just for finance. Compounding small improvements can lead to major results in any kind of endeavor. It is the principle at the core of James Clear's best-selling book, Atomic Habits. The foundational example he gives in the first chapter of his book is the British cycling team. Until 2002, British cycling had won only one Olympic gold medal in their entire history. Then they brought in Sir David Brailsford, a former pro cyclist who had become interested in Japanese business management theories while getting his MBA. The Japanese, of course, have a word for just this thing we're talking about, kaizen, or continuous improvement. Brailsford famously applied this principle to overhauling British cycling. He broke down every aspect of riding a bike and asked his athletes to strive for these small 1% improvements in all of them. When all of those little improvements were put back together and then compounded over time, it created huge increases in performance. Under Brailsford's leadership, British cycling won 16 gold medals over the next 3 Olympics. This approach to improvement has gotten a lot of attention in the sports and business worlds over the past decade, usually under the term marginal gains theory. But I prefer Sir David's original name for it, the 1% factor. So why am I so fascinated by the power of 1% this week? Well, it just seems to keep popping up. As you'll hear in my conversation, my guest this week believes very much in the huge impact potential of lots of small improvements added up over time. And maybe it's just a strange coincidence, but his industry, recreational boating, just so happens to represent 1% of global carbon emissions. Frank Heidinger is the founder and CEO of HALEVAI, a cutting-edge new company making high-performance, fully electric recreational boats. And electrification is only the beginning. Frank is an innovator, dedicated to exploring any and every way to reduce his environmental impact and improve the customer experience of his boats. From cutting-edge material science to thoughtful design to all-American manufacturing, which shortens supply chains. He's a passionate advocate for ocean and waterway conservation, having spent 8 years working with Parley for the Oceans on projects like cleaning up ocean plastics. He's also a seasoned veteran of the hospitality industry, having developed some of the biggest names in nightlife as a VP at the Tao Group and a managing partner at F1 Events. I think he has a super insightful approach on how to practically accomplish meaningful sustainability goals and a really exciting vision for what the future of the industry could be. And I had a blast chatting with him. So without further ado, let's jump into the conversation. Thanks for joining us today, Frank. How's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you, Connor?
I'm great, thank you. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
My name's Frank Heidinger. I am the founder and CEO of HALEVAI, which is an electric boat company based here in the United States.
Awesome. Where are you from originally?
So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, went to school at various institutions in New York City. I studied at the City University Graduate Center. Political science was my entry major. And in my early career, I worked in my father's company, which was a mechanical contracting firm that did large power process facilities. So sewer treatment facilities, power generation plants, no relation that, come 30 years later, I'm working in a renewable energy space. But it did definitely help lay the fundamental groundwork for understanding engineering documentation and understanding power and process and electrical configurations.
What about your love for the ocean and marine life? Where did that kind of come from growing up as a city kid in Brooklyn?
Yeah, it's hard to tell, right? Because you don't get a lot of access to water. And when you do, it's totally murky, cold water. So if there is anything there, you don't know it's there. I'd like to say that nowadays the waters along the South Shore of Long Island, which are the beaches I grew up swimming at when we were lucky enough to make it out, are a completely different ecosystem. Compared to what they were looking like 30 years ago, these waters are thriving with life. I guess my world turned on two occasions, right? When I was about 9 years old, I saw two things. I discovered sharks and shark finning and how cruel that was. And the first moment as a child where you realize how inhumane humans can be and how violent a process it is to fin live animals as they're just swimming around their ocean, doing their thing, and protecting the food source that we come to love, which is fish. The second was when my family took me to Bermuda around the same time. And I was able to, I didn't even have goggles, but water was so clear. I could see these colorful shapes moving around and following me. And I was just thoroughly immersed in that. And I don't think I came out of the water for the 5 days we were there. And I came back to New York completely reinvigorated, and I wanted to become a marine biologist. And, living in Brooklyn in the 80s, that's just not a profession. And so I went into a career in event production and hospitality management, ran some of the largest restaurant groups in the country. And I came back to New York in 2008 or so, and I was doing some work for a venue out in Montauk, which is a place that I was very familiar with as a child. And I was walking along Grand Street, and I saw shark fins in the window of a specialty store there. And I was immediately brought back to that energy of when I was 9 years old and being so passionate about this topic. And that was really the turning point for me, where I kind of pulled the brakes on the hospitality and events and production and started focusing on any way that I could have a physical impact on nature, wildlife, conservation.
Yeah. I want to go back to that era in hospitality. We've had a couple of conversations with other guests who come from hospitality, and it's interesting to me that there's seems to be some through lines between that industry and folks that are leading in sustainability. And I'm curious if you've seen any connecting of the dots between folks that come from a hospitality background and then sustainability and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think there's a direct correlation, but when you are in hospitality and you do love what you do and you love taking care of people and having them enjoy an experience, the part of creating an experience, food on a plate is one thing. And if it tastes great, that's awesome. But if you encapsulate it with an experience, with an ambiance, with a lot of other people with the same energy and the same goal, you bring up the overall enjoyment in the room. And I think when you take that energy that you build and you apply it to any other business, you become customer focused. And so you're always thinking about what's the customer experience going to be like. And so whether it's an engineering project where you're working with battery packs and configurations of, where welds go, you're ultimately thinking about what is this experience going to feel like? What's going to make this different? What is going to change in the overall experience from something people are used to? And I think that's why people from hospitality have success in a wide range of businesses, but also when they start to do something for the environment, they're thinking experience first. And a lot of times that resonates with people because when you hit them on a fundamental level where they become your follower or your movement seeker, they form a deeper bond with the movement that you're creating, no matter what that is.
That's interesting. I love that. I mean, the other thing that I've kind of thought about is there is certainly on the operations side in hospitality, the hidden importance of just logistics, and that so much of the low-hanging fruit in sustainability could be boiled down to doing logistics better, whether that's cleaner, more efficiently.
Yeah, it's interesting on logistics because when you're creating a show or a performance, there's a lot of things that involve time. There's a lot of things that involve inventory, personnel being in the right place at the right time, and then ultimately being able to deliver the experience. And so logistics become a really important factor in that, getting things to where they need to be before they need to be there, being ready, and thinking about how the guest is going to ultimately enjoy that product.
It's the key to kind of that marginal return, right? If you can cut the logistics cost by being more efficient, by doing more with less, it's both waste mitigation, but also profit enhancement, right?
Yeah, it's also about never losing focus of the fact that you can still produce something really interesting with whatever resources you have. So
Right.
you may not have all the right parts in all the right places at the very start. In fact, we often find that when you engineer anything, what you end up with is very different than what you started with. And I found that to be the case in hospitality. You'd program something and it would go completely different, but it would be great. And you roll with the punches and you'd have to, think on your feet quickly and make quick decisions. And I think that's another thing is that when you work in a high impact, real time environment, like a hospitality event production, you don't have time to sit and think through the alternatives. You have to make decisions. And that helps you make decisions at any scale for any project. So when you run into a supply chain issue on one product, you immediately find a replacement, something that's equally, or in many cases better because you thought quickly.
I mean, if that isn't also a metaphor for entrepreneurship, right?
There is no, I'm going to think about it.
No.
You analyze it, you get the best people in the room that you can afford, you trust in their decisions, and you make the best possible decision you can make at the time. And I say this, and I'll say this throughout whatever time we spend together today, is that you always think about the guest experience. I sell boats, but I think of each person, each captain, each family, each group of people that are going to go out as a guest, because we've designed this for them to enjoy the natural environment. When you build a restaurant, you're enjoying a city's environment or the culture of a particular place and time or a special event like a birthday. But when you're out in nature, we want to do that in the most seamless way possible. And so, that's why we started with energy and thinking, okay, how can we reduce carbon? How can we look at renewable energy futures? What does that look like? How do we get the most power by keeping the price down? So it's just a lot of the same ratios are at play when you're thinking about the overall customer experience. You always design for the customer. You put the best creation you can forward with the expectation that it's going to be enjoyed.
It's a good, I think, bridge to where you are from hospitality to kind of talk about that interim chapter at the Ritz-Carlton in the Maldives and thinking about the customer experience as one that should be also deeply value-based and impact-based and sustainable. So I'm curious if you talk to us about that experience also.
Yeah, so I'd spent several years working in the Maldives on plastic pollution collection, so we call ocean plastic. I worked for several years with an organization called Parlay for the Oceans, and we had a really large ocean cleanup effort in the Maldives. It's a small island developing state, and as such, limited resources to combat all of this plastic that's washing up on its thousands of beaches every single day. And so we found a supply chain for that. And so wearing the hat of a person who's thinking about pollution collection and supply chain distribution, when I went into the Ritz project, we were really focused on making the largest impact for an island resort that had ever been built by not only using really high-level diesel generators to create power so that we're more efficient, but also thinking about solar power. On day one of that project, I believe there was 20% of the overall capacity for power on the island was generated through a renewable energy resource. It was the largest solar farm in the Maldives at the time, to the extent that they not only put solar farms on the tops of each of the guest bungalows, but they also had these floating solar farms that were out on open water. And so they were able to get a larger portion of the day capture because rather than just facing one direction cardinally, they had the full rays of the sun. And there were a lot of other really interesting projects that we did there to improve the overall environment. I worked with a really great team at Dive Butler, which is their dive school and their environmental school there. And they made significant strides in lowering pollution, using better boats, doing things at certain times of the month when they would have a lower impact on the environment, really understanding, people are there to see wildlife, but they were very conscious of not overwhelming wildlife and making sure that they were leaving the natural environment intact.
So then I still haven't heard the seed of entrepreneurship planted yet. When did you start to think about this idea of building your own business?
So when we were on boats collecting plastic, or I was dealing with teams that were around the world collecting plastic, we were in this immersed conversation around moving product around the world and upcycling it into a longer life cycle purpose. And a lot of the people, some of them who we share friendships with, who are marine scientists, all this great work they do to give us the data, to make plans, and to inform governments, they're doing it on these small watercraft that are gas powered. And although the overall gas emissions from small boats is relatively small net the whole, it's a really low-lying fruit, right? Like it hangs so low because if you could just take this one segment of, if most of the universities in the United States over the next 10 years were to move their small fleets into renewable energy resources. By the time you get to 2030, those results are compounded. So not only have you mitigated, but now you're a greater part of the reduction overall. And you're part of that 2050 COP21 plan. In fact, we named our model 2050, the first boat we made, after that year, because the idea was the boat was not about today. The boat was about what is this going to look like in 2050? Because I want to think of myself, if I'm lucky enough to live to 2050, it's not that far away, but you never know. I want to be able to sit on a boat somewhere and see all of the small watercraft propelled by some sort of renewable energy. It doesn't have to be electric. There may be better technologies that come between now and then. The idea was to start there. And I think it just made sense. It just made sense. Now, the question was, it made sense theoretically in my mind, but it didn't necessarily make sense on paper. And so it was that question mark. Does this make sense? Is there a power profile that is cost effective and readily available for mass production, currently available to move boats over water, small boats? And the answer was, it is, but you have to take into consideration the flow dynamics or the shape of the hull, because the shape of the hull determines the force loads that are going to be required to move that boat. And so when we developed our first boat, we did a wide range of conditional flow dynamics on different hull styles to see what was the most efficient hull. And we found a hull that was really efficient. And then we designed a deck that would be really enjoyable. So we were focused on recreation from the start. We now have moved into more institutional uses, more municipality uses, which is a wonderful natural occurrence. We've just hired up some really great people on our team to help those efforts. And we'll be delivering boats to municipalities in 2025 throughout the United States. But the initial goal was to start with the most efficient system we could build at the lowest possible price per kilowatt hour, and then open up the deck so that those aboard could have the best experience. So now we're going back to the hospitality days. How do you move around? How does traffic flow? What are the sections of enjoyment on the boat? Is there always a grab rail? Is there always something to hold on to? How is the boat performing? How is it listing? And so we took all of these things. And by that point, I was in. It was asking a series of questions, analyzing a series of answers, asking a few more questions, getting answers. And then by that point, it was, let's go. Let's do this, because it is possible. We realized that with the right partnerships and the right architecture, it was totally possible.
In your mind, what was the rationale that we've seen this sprint towards electrification in terrestrial vehicles, but it hadn't had the same dynamic over in the water yet? Was there a reason for that?
So I think what happens is my experience showed me that a lot of the folks who got into developing technology for electrically powering boats took the historical context of car design, for example, Tesla, as the model. And so, and I'm going to point out a fundamental difference between ours and, let's say, theirs. Tesla started with a roadster that was a high performance vehicle. And a lot of the boat manufacturers did the same thing, where they went after this high end market. But the challenge is that's not the way boats are bought in America. If you can afford to spend $700,000 or $800,000 on a boat, you're going to buy a boat that can go longer distances, blue water, has bathrooms, has places to sleep, has places to cook. The other part is automotive OEMs typically design most of the components in their vehicles from start to finish, right? And they build out these large networks for servicing them. Well, there's significantly fewer boats in the United States. And so typically the way traditional boat builders have designed these systems is there's the hull designer, there's the components and low harness designer, and then there's the propulsion designer. So you have Suzuki and Yamaha and Mercury, and they make stern drives. And then you have the bigger boats that have, inboard diesel engines. Those engines are not manufactured in many cases by the manufacturer of the boat. And so this is something that we adapted to quite quickly. There were some really beautiful electric boats on the market, but they were very high priced and they were very hard to service at scale. So when we started to work our way into this topic, we decided to act more as an integrator and experiential company. So we would say, we're going to hire the engineers to take existing, tested, available, very well-oiled supply chain materials, and we're going to put them together and integrate them into this new boat experience. So when people say, well, what kind of boat is it? I say, it's really a new category boat. It looks like other boats you've seen, but it's not exactly right. In fact, I tell the story often when I'm out with my son or my family on the boat. I'll always get this person who's on another boat who will kind of inch towards me. They'll pull their anchor, will slowly make their way over, and they'll say, hey, is that an electric boat? Now, our boat on the outside of it does not say anything electric, no gas. It says nothing. It just says the name of the company, HALEVAI. And so people will creep over and they'll say, is that an electric boat? And I'll go, yeah, it is. How did you know? And they'll go, kind of looks like an electric boat. And you go, well, what does an electric boat look like? But the idea is that because it's this new category, it's this new shape, it's something that's not exactly understandable, you assume that it's part of a new technology. And that was part of the design process, to really offer a new experience where you get the power of a center console and you get the experience of maybe a more open deck boat. And you're able to go into wide ranges of bodies of water, and you can get into really shallow water, and you can get really fast. And that was a lot of how this sort of thing came together.
For those of us who are not as familiar with the market, give us a sense of how big the recreational boating industry actually is, both economically, but then I'm also kind of curious how you think about it relative to environmental impact.
Yeah, so recreational boating as an environmental impact makes up about 1% of carbon globally. So very, very small. All those recreational boats you see in all the waters around the world, it's less than 1%. But it's something that people do regularly, and there's a lot of traffic, and the boating industry grows every year. To give some hints into what the boating industry looks like in the United States, there's about 150,000 new boats sold under 30 feet and under $250,000 every year. And 100,000 of those boats, 2/3 of the small boats, are deck boats, small watercraft. And so that's where the heart of the market is. And a lot of it's not happening in the coastal communities. It's happening inland. It's happening in bays and waterways and lakes and rivers and tidal estuaries. And so we put our focus on that, because you really can't compete with the boat companies that have been around for 20, 30, 40 years that do a really great job, that are ice powered. It's very hard to compete with simply just going into that category and say, okay, we're electric. But if you create a whole different experience and a whole different way of operation, you also open up a whole new market. I have this thing where often I get mothers coming out with their kids without their spouses, right? Moms come and want to check out the boat. They've heard about it through someone. I give them a demo, and they're really apprehensive. They're really cautious. They think I'm going to drive the boat. They think they're just coming for a ride. And I said, no, why don't you take over? And they go, no, I'm not a captain. I don't know how to do that. And you show them, you just use a fob and you go right up to this little fob detector and click on, and the boat's on. And then nothing happens. And you hear the contactors click. And then they go, hit that button. Okay, start, stop. It's simple. Then you hit a green button. And now your prop's engaged. And say, okay, we're ready to go. I'm going to untie us and put the throttle in reverse. And it spins really slowly, and there's no sound. And that experience, you watch their eyes light up, because for the first time in their life, they're not intimidated by this thing. And so there's so many places I think we can go where we can open up a totally new market to people who would have never thought about boating. We share friends who never drove a car. We have a good friend who never drove a car. And I would say, so why would I drive a car? I live in the city. I don't need a car. And then years ago, our friend gets a Tesla, and because it's renewable energy and it's good for the environment, it's easy. And so there's this whole other category of potential consumer that we're opening up to.
Yeah. I also think, the idea of fleets, I don't know why I didn't think of it originally, but it makes so much sense that that's a great opportunity that is important to crack into for this market.
With marina fleets specifically, it's a really interesting opportunity. It is highly political. There is a lot of long-term contracts, old agreements in place. It's totally penetratable, right? We can get there. But what is something that does really resonate with a lot of these operators when you talk to them, and I spent a good amount of time up in Lake George this year, and I spoke to a bunch of the marine operators in the Adirondack region. And when you start to talk about the amount of power required to fill the packs and the cost per kilowatt hour using New York State or Florida pricing, you're talking about 40 to 50 nautical miles of navigation on a full charge, which costs you about $8 US. If you were to put that in the gas equivalent, you're talking about over 100. So it's, yes, the boat does cost more up front. There's less maintenance. Your costs are about 30% annually to operate the vehicle. That's including powering the vehicle. So when marina operators start to think about how much downtime they have in servicing, which is a big significant number, how many units they have in their fleet, and then how much it costs to fuel them. And again, often fuel is passed along to the customer. So you can actually rent that boat for more because there's no gas. You can include the power and just charge a higher price, which is still less than the base price plus the gas that the competitors charging down the road. So the overall price for the rental goes down if you're using electric.
Yeah. You've spoken a little bit about this idea that you want the company to operate as a communication space for innovation in materials and energy solutions with a focus on educating the public. And I'm curious, I love that framework. I'm curious if you could elaborate on it a little bit.
So boats are made, even ours, in a very toxic manner. They are. Most boats are made out of fiberglass or aluminum. Fiberglass is the majority. And fiberglass is a resin. It's a petrochemical product. It's a byproduct of big gas, the big industry. And all of the composites, which make the structures of boating, which makes them strong and safe and durable, those are also petrochemicals. And so we are really invested in creating partnerships to work with more biodynamic materials, new resins, new composites, and there are many. We have a whole division in our company that is completely dedicated to working on material development. The challenge is testing these properly. I jumped the gun on a few things with this build. One, I went with the only Sunbrella material that was made from all organic threads. So I chose that material specifically. No resins, no polys. I put it on the boat. 6 weeks later, I ripped it off because it can't take the outdoor environment. I put in a beautiful cork decking grown in France, and we could not get the precision in the laser cutting of the deck. We couldn't reach the smaller spaces. We couldn't get the beveled edges. The technology just was not there. Yeah. So we're going to keep working with those developers, and we're going to make those products better. And then we're going to offer them as upgrades. So we are really looking at breaking down, and this is a long haul. So we are starting with power. Power is available. The technology's there, the propulsion's there, and the speed and the enjoyment is there, and the safety's there. So we're good at starting there. But as we develop, we are going to be testing and partnering with groups and organizations that are looking at what is the future of boating. Because I do think if we're able to fast forward to 2050, we will see that a lot of these small boats will be made out of biodynamic materials. These are going to be resins that are made from organic structures that can be upcycled, and they don't have to just be cut up and sunk to the bottom of the ocean or put in a landfill.
Yeah. I mean, we've had a couple of great conversations with folks in the material sciences space, ranging from the guys at Check Our Spot who are building the Wonder Alpine Ski as an algae-based product, to the folks at Modern Meadow who are doing a bunch of applications. What's interesting, one of the things that the CEO of Modern Meadow, Catherine, said, which I think makes a ton of sense in this context, no one needs to figure out perfection today. We all should just be striving for improvements, consistent improvements to make better products, more sustainable products, and then better again, and then better again. And I think too often folks stop their innovation cycle because they don't think it's going far enough, fast enough. And the result is that we're stuck in the status quo versus let's make a marginal improvement here. And then power is the first marginal improvement. And then we're going to continue to iterate and continue to build a better product and a more sustainable product. You know, that's how you actually get this transition is a transition. It's not a systemic pivot.
That's exactly right. I'll give you one example from ours is we're working with a material that it's a lava-based material. So if you take lava rock and you heat it up and you extrude it, it turns into like a glass, and you can use bioresins to make composite structures. Now, the first step is to build a box. So we have a battery box in our existing boat made out of fiberglass. So there's the hulls made out of fiberglass, and then within the hull is a battery box where the battery compartment goes. We are building that box out of this material, right? So part of our build sheet is going to be this material. We're getting the material tested. Within 12 months from now, we should be able to certify the result in supply chain. And that way, going forward, all the small compartments, rather than building them out of plastic or fiberglass, we're building them out of this bioresin. Now, it's only part of the component. It's still a fiberglass hull. But then, as we go, we're going to explore the composites for the external structures of the boat and see how that fares. And then possibly we can just do a deck only. That is the vision that I have, is to slowly chip away at every single material that you use to build something and replace it with something better. And you do that over time. And you think about how that all weaves together to a beautiful story, but also a beautiful product and a beautiful outcome for we can reuse a lot of these materials.
Sure. What was it like to kind of take this idea into the market, both on the consumer side, but also for partners in the industry or investors? Like, how was the story received?
I think at first people are really skeptical. The biggest question is, why are you doing this? Right? Because they go, well, it's only 1% of the market, and you talk about carbon, so why are you really doing this? And I said, because one, it's a different experience. It really is a different experience. If you've driven boats, there's a standard in center consoles and pontoon boats or whatever the type of boat you've driven. This is a totally different experience. I have a friend of mine who has a beautiful boat, so slightly larger than ours. It's made by one of the top boat makers in the country. It is a beautiful boat, a beautiful leisure craft. I prefer to drive our boat. It is just a nice experience. I have friends who come over, and it's not that they want to be on the electric boat. They just they've been on both, and they're like, it's more fun. There's more room. It's a different experience. And so I think that's what I tell people is it's not so much about just the carbon mitigation, because ultimately sea level rise is not going to be changed by recreational boating, right? But the experience that you have while you're on the water can both be better and also be doing better. So you can get a better experience as the user, but you can also be having a bigger impact and slowly chipping away. All of these big, lofty goals that governments put together are part of smaller transactions.
Yeah.
It's all of these cumulative effects. And also when you change, and I found this to be the case with ocean plastic, is that when we were doing that in the early days, a lot of people would say, why are you doing this? You're never going to clean up plastic, and plastic's never going to stop being used. But then every single design house, every single couture house, every single fashion brand has been using some sort of recycled ocean plastic. And they weren't doing that 12 years ago. So the idea is that there's also this moment that occurs where people realize, wait, you can do that? Why aren't we doing that?
Right.
And that's where we don't take any credit for that, right? We don't want to take any credit for that. That's the nexus of doing things like this, is that ultimately it rubs off and people see it and they enjoy it and they want to be part of it. And the movement takes off without you. You don't have to do anything further. It just goes off on its own.
I mean, I love the idea that there's also both hidden opportunity, hidden economy, and supply chain, but also in innovation. I know you guys have been really thoughtful about where you're innovating and who you're partnering with, and have been able to do a lot of that domestically, which I think is a really admirable part of the innovation cycle for you.
Yeah, this country is really special. And I think when you get into geopolitics, that sometimes gets lost, that there are very few places that you can do what you can do here.
Yeah.
It may take longer. There may be supply chain issues. There may be interest rates, but there's this beauty of the American system that if you put a good team together and you focus and you work things out and you're able to stick with it, you can make things happen. And just to put in perspective, we tried to work with a partner initially in the early stages of HALEVAI that was going to build our powertrains in Europe, a very, very, very big German auto manufacturer. And they were coming in at a price that was 2.5x what a startup in Utah could get us. 2.5 times. And that was it just killed innovation. Not only the price, but the shipping of batteries has to go by sea. And so you can't air freight anything when you're dealing with supply chain. You're just weeks away from a total disaster.
Yeah.
And so I really love building things in America. I've gotten to travel to places in this country that I would have never visited. And I'm thankful that there's a workforce in America and an acumen and an intelligence. And there's really a hard work ethic here. People get up and they will tinker with it until it works. And they will do it safely and they'll do it within the guise of the law. And that's a really special thing that I don't think we talk about enough in America. I will say the boating business traditionally in the US is mostly American based, right? But we wanted to continue that tradition. We didn't want to be the new technology being built in China when all the gas or ice competitors are built in the US. The fact that all of our parts are built here, of course, there's boards made in China, there's pieces that come from here and there. But the idea is that the overall design, the overall assembly is done here, and it's done by Americans in America. And I really like that idea, and we're going to stick to that for as long as we can.
I also think there's a spirit of innovation. And I think that it's one of the things that keeps me hopeful. Businesses are looking for new products to design that are solving these problems. They see it as an opportunity to do good for the world and to differentiate and make a profit. And I think you definitely don't see that everywhere.
Yeah, and we work with a powertrain partner called Hypercraft. They're based in Utah. And it's exactly that. There's this spirit of innovation. I was out there 2 weeks ago. We just redesigned our entire user interface. And so the part of the modification that we're doing here in South Florida involves not only upgrading to a longer range battery system, but to completely overhaul the user experience, the way that data reports and the way that data is computed. And so, I was out there reviewing this, and I have to tell you, there's something beautiful about the spirit of building new things and hitting hurdles and coming back and getting everyone together at 8 a.m. and going at it again. It's pretty special.
Yeah. Certainly, you have at your core an environmentally conscious conservation, sustainability ethos within the corporate mission itself. I'm curious how you balance that alongside the need for this to be a business enterprise with a profit and loss statement and stakeholders that you're accountable to. How do you align your sense of doing good with the need to run a good business?
I think every business person looks at, if they make the wrong decision, all of the good that comes from all their good decisions doesn't have the ability to mature. And you have to be able to walk that rope. You can be uncompromising in certain ways, but there are other places where you have to take the team decision and you have to look at what your team's recommending. And thankfully, thus far, a lot of our bigger decisions have not been ones that compromise my environmental penchant. I've always wanted to be behind something that is going to slowly chip away at doing better for the world. But we have to build a boat out of fiberglass. We're going to build an aluminum model this year for a municipality out west that we're working with. And that'll be the first aluminum boat of its kind to be built this way. But the market suggests it wants a fiberglass boat. And so we're going to build a fiberglass boat. That is the best material, the most cost-effective material. Municipalities have larger budgets. They have different use cases. They work these boats 12, 15, 18 hours a day in some cases. They need them to be built out of a certain material, but the recreational space wants them to be built out of another material. What I think is that if I continue to sell boats and deliver a good customer experience and create a new segment of boating, then I'm going to be able to spend more money in R&D and make better partnerships and file for new grants, which are going to allow me to explore new materials and new configurations. And that's only going to make our product better.
Yeah. I think for a lot of folks, recreational boating has a bit of a allure as a luxury product or good. And certainly, some of the hospitality also kind of falls into that more elevated luxury experience. I'm curious how you think about the ways in which the luxury space is making way for sustainability, whether it's in travel, in hospitality, in experiences like boating. How do you see the upper ends of the economic spectrum thinking about how they're using discretionary spending, and then the services that are adapting in the sustainability space?
Look, I think there are people on either end of that spectrum. I think there are really beautiful luxury brands that make a really diligent and wholehearted effort to both put their money where their mouth is and put their policies where their mouth is and put their principles where they say they are. There's also a lot of luxury brands that greenwash, and there's other brands that don't care even to greenwash. I tend not to think about what everyone else is doing, though, because I think about if what I can do can have an impact, and maybe someone will just pick up that habit. If they'll see something we do. So rather than think about what they are doing, I'm just going to do what I think is the best possible decision for us. And if people tend to like that decision and the light bulb goes off and they want to inquire how we did it, we're also open source in that way. We don't covet a lot of what we're doing because we want other people to do it. Right now, if there were 10 new companies that were to do exactly what we're going to do, first of all, it's going to take them 3 years to get here. So good luck. It's a really, really steep hill. I will tell you from my own personal experience, it comes with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But if you get there, that's great, because that means we're going to get a greater conversion at a faster pace. That means charging stations are going to appear faster. That means that more people are going to be willing to adopt this technology. It means more people are going to get comfortable with it, because as you know, even in the automotive space, still a really small section of the overall car space. And there's still a lot of people who are adamantly opposed to anything other than ICE. And I drive an F-150, and it's a traditional F-150.
No Lightning for you?
It doesn't have the range. And that's just the truth, right? But it's never going to get the range if people don't buy the one that's available now. So when we do shorter hauls, we'll use that car, right? We have an electric vehicle we use for shorter hauls. When we do longer hauls, we have to go with the technology. Yeah. You can be both things at the same time. You can be both doing good and realizing how you could do better at the same exact time. And you don't have to be all into one bucket, because if you're that rigid, you won't grow.
I love this idea of open sourcing. And again, this is a theme that I've heard a ton from leaders that are innovating in this space. Allbirds open source their shoe materials technology. This is a constant refrain. I think it's really a powerful shift in paradigm around how companies can be good social participants and still be winning at the economic game.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes down to what we discussed earlier, which is the experience. Two people can take the same materials and the same drawing, and the experience at the end will be very different. We always built these venues, and I did the same thing with the boat, where it's like 80% of it's on the drawing, and the other 20% comes when you experience it. You add things here, you change things there, you soften a curve, you change the way something feels or the material it's made out of. And so that's where like the magic is. And so the technology to put batteries together with propulsion over water, if you do enough research and hire a good team, you're going to figure out how to do that. It's the overall experience of what's the customer service like? What's the buying experience like? What is it like 6 months later when you have a question? What is that experience? Because that you can't really open source. That's something that has to come from the inside of the leadership and the management and the direction. And so I've always said like a nightclub is really just four walls and a sound system. But what makes one great and one not? It's because the people that go in there pay attention to detail, they pay attention to lighting, they pay attention to the experience. They really handhold you through the process. And so you really can't open source the love for what you do.
Yeah, I love that. That's a quotable moment right there.
If you love what you're doing and you're making the best possible product to deliver, and really it's from your heart, you're building this for the experience, you want to share this. And if someone doesn't like it, that's okay. You'll hear their feedback, but you're doing it with the best possible intention. You can't really draw that. You can engineer so far, but then the rest of it is just this I think Fellini said, there's nothing more to life than magic and pasta. And it's kind of like that. When it comes down to it, it's the most simple things that bring you joy. And so if you can focus on bringing joy to people in those ways, then you have a nice business, or at least we hope.
You might be the first Fellini quote we've had on the podcast. Over 50
I might have gotten it wrong. I might have gotten it wrong.
Someone will fact check it, I'm sure. When you think back to kind of the moments that define the importance of environmental consciousness to you, whether it's in Bermuda as a kid, being outside on the water, walking down the street in Montauk and seeing the shark fins, I think those are very visceral visions that help anyone understand the point of view that you bring. I'm curious, if you were to close your eyes and try to picture a vision of the future, 20, 30, 40 years from now, whenever it might be, if you were to close your eyes and kind of picture what success looks like in terms of this world coming together and building a sustainable future, I'm curious what yours looks like, what you kind of see as the ideal future for what we could accomplish.
I will tell you that I was sailing a few years ago when this project was just in its infancy, and I was sitting on the front of a boat and I was watching these little boats go by, these tender boats go by. And I did close my eyes and I did sort of envision what that environment could feel like, both visually and also in the way that it would sound and feel. And it's one of the reasons I found the word HALEVAI. So the HALEVAI is a Yiddish word, it's a Hebrew word, it's an Aramaic word. It's a really old word, it's 6,000 years old. And it is exactly that thing you just asked me about. It is the ability for us to, whether we're driving down the road in our cars or doing a meditation or taking a shower, and we can see the future and we know the will for it to be. We have the will for it to be. And we don't know exactly how it's going to look. So I can't tell you exactly how it's going to look, but I can tell you how it's going to feel. And it's going to feel really different. It's going to feel better. We are going to make adjustments. We are going to right the wrongs. We're going to create other problems as we go. But it's important to talk about that word, because that is essentially the we will. It's on our website. It's kind of our flag in the earth where we say, we will do these things. We will innovate the power. We will innovate the material. We will innovate the experience, because we have the will for it to be. And we all have that will. And across cultures, we all have this feeling of looking forward and visualizing what the future is, not knowing how we're going to get there, but knowing that we will.
Yeah.
That's why we searched and we found this word, and then we looked at it and we're like, it's the perfect word to describe the feeling that we're trying to push out into the world.
I love that. I love that the visions are so real, partially because the product is one that empowers, enables, facilitates us to commune with nature itself. I think that's so powerful, right?
Can we not do it in a better way? And
Yeah.
if I want to go to the Bahamas, I don't get to go to the Bahamas that often these days. I work a lot in fiberglass factories. But, if any of us want to go to the Bahamas, you're going to take a gas boat. And that's going to be like that for many years to come. And there's probably going to be other technologies like hydrogen potentially that are going to help push that forward on the larger boats. But this is low-hanging fruit. We can convert this. We can do it. Our grid's getting better. We're going to go from 13 to 20% in the next few years. We're going to go from 20% to 50% in the next 20 years. We are going to do a better job. This is going to look very differently. And we're going to learn along the way. And I think if you lose any of that optimism, then you've lost it all.
Yeah. So let's just end with another easy one. Give us where listeners can find out more and figure out more.
So right now, you can check us out on Instagram at HALEVAI Power and on halevai.com. You can check out the product. You can read about the specs. You can see where we're located. You can schedule a demo if you'd like to come visit us. We'll have multiple demo boats around the country by the middle of this year. So we'll be able to service a lot more people and demo a lot more. We have a 2024 delivery schedule that is already full. So we're taking orders now for 2025, which is really exciting. Also, we are a small business at this point. And until we can't do it anymore, we're going to handle every customer on a one-to-one basis. So every single person who's a first year buyer knows every single person on our team. And it's like a big family. And I'd like to keep it that way. I know when companies grow that things changes, but for as long as we can maintain that, we will.
I love it. Huge thanks to Frank for joining us on the show this week. I'm inspired by his approach to progress over perfection, his idea of building movements through meaningful experiences, and just the whole concept of HALEVAI as a we will vision of the future. If we all together go after the low-hanging fruit in each of our own spaces, making the best changes our technology allows for when and where we can make it, the amount of positive change that can add up is so much greater and so much faster than I think we all can realize. Also, the HALEVAI boats are super cool, and I'm hoping to get on one soon. As Frank mentioned, if you'd like to learn more about the company, you can visit their website, halevai.com. And you can definitely check out the boats for yourself on their Instagram, at HALEVAI Power. I'd recommend you go give it a look and see what Frank was talking about, that people can just kind of tell his boats are electric. They've got a very futuristic look to them, and it's unlike anything I've ever seen out there. You can also connect with Frank directly on LinkedIn or X, both at Frank Heidinger. As always, we'll have those links for you in the show notes. As for us, you can reach us by email at cic@consensus-digital.com. That's cic@consensus-digital.com. Or you can connect with me directly on LinkedIn and Threads at ckgaughan. That's at ckgone. We'd love for you to reach out with any questions, comments, or ideas sparked by today's chat with Frank, or if you have a great suggestion for a future guest. We love learning about anything new in the space, so please drop us a line. Finally, if you like the show today, please give us a follow, a like, and leave a review wherever you listen. It helps us to grow our reach and continue bringing you more awesome conversations with the business leaders that you want to hear from. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back next week with a brand new conversation. Consensus in Conversation is hosted and executive produced by me, Conor Gaughan. The episode was produced by Will Gatchell and Jeff Rock, with editing from the good folks at Reasonable Volume. Special thanks to the Consensus team, including creative director Kate Tucker, Greg Hergel on research, and Patrick Gallagher on strategy. Consensus in Conversation can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Consensus in Conversation is a podcast by Consensus Digital Media, produced in association with Reasonable Volume.